It's strange how a day that starts with the smell of coffee can end with the scent of ashes. I found out my boyfriend was cheating on me when I stopped by his place with his favorite caramel latte. The irony, I never visited without letting him know first. We had established that rule at the beginning of our relationship. I'd text him, and he'd open the door. But that morning, something nudged me to surprise him, to do something nice. The door wasn't locked. I remember thinking, naive. He trusts his neighbors too much. But the real problem wasn't the neighbors. I took 3 steps inside and heard laughter. A woman's laughter. Light, ringing, almost theatrical, like it belonged to an actress in an expensive perfume commercial. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I lost my balance. Then I heard his voice, the same warm, slightly husky tone he used to speak to me with after nights spent together. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." The world froze. He used to say that to me. Only to me. I stood there, gripping the paper cup, which suddenly felt heavier and hotter than it had seconds ago. I should have turned around and walked out. Pretended I didn't hear a thing. But something inside me snapped, like a fuse blowing out. I took a step forward. I didn't know what I wanted to see. Maybe I hoped to convince myself I was wrong. That the voice was just familiar, that the laughter belonged to a sister, a cousin, a friend. But the world doesn't cater to our naive hopes. I peeked into the bedroom. And I saw everything. He was lying in bed, half naked, covered by a blanket just enough to leave room for imagination. And next to him sat a girl, blonde hair perfectly styled, legs longer than my entire relationship with him. She was laughing, running her finger along his chest. And he was looking at her the way I thought he only looked at me. At that moment, I realized, he wasn't sorry. He didn't look guilty. He looked like this was normal. Like it wasn't the first time. Something inside me broke. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I just walked closer. And I poured the hot caramel latte onto his chest. His reaction was priceless. At first, he just blinked like his brain refused to comprehend what was happening. Then the heat hit. Shit! He jumped up, frantically rubbing his chest. His perfect lover recoiled, nearly falling off the bed. I calmly placed the empty cup on his nightstand and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Oh, sorry, sweetheart," I whispered in the sweetest voice I could muster. "I just thought you might need a little warmth." His face flushed in patches, a mix of anger, pain, and fear. "Oh, I liked that." The blonde finally found her voice. "Who the hell are you?" she shrieked, clutching the bedsheet to cover herself. I smiled even wider. "Me?" I tilted my head. "I'm just his girlfriend." "Well, was. Until now." She paled. Whether she believed me or not didn't matter. The fact remained, she was in bed with a guy who had a girlfriend and now didn't know where to look. As for him, the piece of shit finally snapped out of it. "You've lost your mind," he spat, his voice cracking. I almost pitied him. Almost. I took a step toward him. "Oh, maybe I have," I whispered, leaning in closer. "But so have you. If you thought I wouldn't find out." He said nothing. I cast one last glance at the scene, at the bewildered blonde, at my no longer boyfriend with coffee-stained skin, at the bed that was now a symbol of all the lies in our relationship. And I walked out. I thought that was the end of it. But 3 days later, I learned he hadn't cheated on me with just one person. Not even 2. I wanted to forget him again. But life had other plans. Because 3 days after I poured that hot coffee on his chest, I found out I was pregnant. I stared at the 2 red lines on the pregnancy test, as if they might disappear if I blinked enough times. It was the cheapest test I could find, bought with trembling hands from the nearest pharmacy. April 2, 2025, 23:54. I had stood in front of the shelves for 10 minutes, scanning every option, as though the price tag could change the result. But they would all say the same thing. I was pregnant. With his child. It was suddenly hard to breathe. I leaned against the sink, trying not to collapse. This is a joke. This can't be real. I counted the days, tried to remember when I'd last had my period. Every calculation pointed to the same conclusion. A wave of panic coursed through me. Only 3 days ago, I had stormed out of his apartment, leaving him naked, scalded, and probably a little traumatized. I thought I had put a period at the end of our story. And now? What now? Now, I had a choice. 1. Forget everything and move on, as if nothing had happened. 2. Have a child with a man who didn't even deserve my attention. 3. Tell him. I immediately ruled out the third option. He didn't deserve to know. He didn't deserve me. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot. My lips, pale. My hair, disheveled. I can still fix this. That thought was dangerous. I put the test away and walked out of the bathroom, unsure what to do next. The next few days were hell. I tried to think rationally. A child is forever. It's a responsibility. Could I do it on my own? I knew my parents wouldn't understand. They'd always told me to focus on my career before thinking about family. My friends? Most of them had their own lives, their own problems. And him? He had probably already forgotten my name while caressing some other girl's thigh. I didn't cry. I just sat in the dark, wrapped in a blanket, and thought. Then the decision came to me. I'd do it alone. I wouldn't tell him. I wouldn't tell anyone until I was ready. I wouldn't be a victim. I wouldn't let him have control over my future. I'd start a new life. Without him. But life had its own plans. Because a week later, I got a message from him. One single word. Talk. I stared at the screen, as if the phone itself could give me the answer on what to do. Talk. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a command. Just a question. But behind it lay everything about him, a man who was always confident he would get a response. I traced my finger along the edge of the phone, feeling something dark and painful rise inside me. Anger. No. Not just anger. Rage. How dare he? How dare he show up in my life after I had decided to erase him from it? I wanted to ignore it. But instead, I responded. About what? Deliberately dry. Cold. The silence stretched. I could see that he'd read the message but wasn't replying. I imagined him sitting in his expensive office or his luxury apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, tapping his fingers on the screen, trying to figure out the right way to manipulate me this time. My body trembled with tension. The test still sat in the drawer. Those 2 red lines burned in my memory. He didn't have the right to know. I wouldn't let him be part of this. Then, another message. Can we meet? No. I didn't even think about it. I replied immediately. Why? Short. Sharp. This wasn't a game I intended to play. He was quiet for a few minutes before finally replying. I want to talk to you. In person. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. In person? So he could look at me with those dark eyes, the ones I used to drown in? So he could say something that would make me doubt myself? So he could pull me back into the trap I had barely escaped? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. But there was no calm. I knew one thing, I wasn't the same person I was back then. I didn't respond. I turned off my phone. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my life. But the battle was just beginning. I turned off the phone, but it remained in my hands for a long time. It felt like a foreign object, something that no longer held any significance for me. But that was a lie. I breathed deeply. Once. Twice. Trying to steady myself, to find something to anchor me. April 2nd, 2025, 23:54. But there was no anchor. Only me, this small apartment, and suffocating silence. I opened the drawer again. The test lay there, a silent witness to everything that had happened. I thought this would be easier. I thought I could just push it out of my mind, make decisions that were convenient for me. But now I understood, I wasn't ready. I never had been. What now? The question tore at me from the inside. It seemed simple enough. Hundreds of women made this choice every day. But every fiber of my being screamed that it wasn't. Not for me. I put the test back and shut the drawer. Then I did the only thing I could do at that moment. I ran. Not physically. But I grabbed my coat, pulled the hood over my head, and bolted out of the apartment, as if putting distance between me and that space could somehow solve all my problems. The street greeted me with biting cold. The wind cut through me, but I didn't stop. I walked quickly, not caring where I was going, letting my feet choose the direction. And then I smelled it. Freshly brewed coffee. It hit me like a punch to the chest, and I realized where I had ended up. The coffee shop. That coffee shop. The place where it had all started. Irony. I stood in front of the door like it was a portal to the past. His voice echoed in my mind. I love you so much. I love you both so much. I closed my eyes. Lies. Every word had been a lie. And yet. I pushed the door open and walked inside. Your order? I looked up at the barista. I wanted to say something, but the words were stuck in my throat. Are you okay? She asked, leaning closer with a concerned look. Caramel latte, I finally whispered. You idiot. That was his favorite drink. I didn't even like caramel. God damn it. But it was too late to change my order. The barista smiled, punched in the order, and I stepped back, leaning against the wall. I didn't even know why I had come here. I'd run from him. From the problem. But now I was stuck in this place, surrounded by memories. Here's your order. I took the cup, feeling its warmth in my hands, but I didn't drink. Instead, I stood there, staring at it. Everything inside me tightened. The past wouldn't let go. I walked outside, gripping the cup tighter, and did what I should have done a long time ago. I raised my hand, and poured the caramel crap onto the asphalt. I watched as the coffee spread into a muddy puddle. Just like my mind, tangled with memories I desperately wanted to forget. Well, isn't this a dramatic scene? I flinched. A voice. His voice. Slowly, I turned around. He was standing a few steps away. Dark coat. Disheveled hair. Shadows of exhaustion under his eyes. But still the same. Still. Mine. No. He wasn't mine. He never had been. What are you doing here? I snapped, my words as sharp as a knife. He raised his hands in surrender. Relax. I'm not stalking you. Just a coincidence. Liar. He smiled, but there was something else in his eyes. Okay. Lying. But I need to talk to you. There's nothing to talk about. I took a step back. But he stepped forward. There is. His voice changed. It became serious. Deep. I know what I did. And I know I can't fix it. Then why are you here? He looked at me for a long moment. Then he whispered. Because I can't do this anymore without you. The wind swept between us. I inhaled sharply, like I'd been punched in the chest. He opened his mouth to say something else. But I was already turning around, already walking away, leaving him behind. Because if I stayed one more second, I might believe him again. And I couldn't let that happen. I walked faster, nearly breaking into a run. I needed to get away. Don't look back. Don't think. But thoughts were stronger than me. Because I can't do this anymore without you. His voice echoed in my mind, in rhythm with my pounding pulse. It didn't matter. It shouldn't matter. I reached the town square, where people hurried about their day, their faces blending into a blur. April 2nd, 2025, 23:54. The only thing that mattered was forgetting. But how do you forget something that's taken root deep inside you? You can't just pull it out. It leaves a void behind. Hey, a rough voice broke through my thoughts. I had collided with someone, a tall man in a dark coat, nearly spilling his coffee. Watch where you're going. Sorry, I mumbled and kept walking. I didn't care. The world around me felt like a foggy dream, unreal and distant. Why had he come back? I had fought so hard to push him out of my life. And now he was here. And everything was unraveling. My past. My future. I wanted to scream. But when I got back to my apartment, the silence was even louder. I closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down to the floor. When you're drowning in emotions, there's nothing more terrifying than silence. It strips away the noise, leaving you with the truth. And the truth was, I didn't know how to live without him. But I also knew that letting him back in would mean letting myself burn all over again. I shut my eyes. What am I supposed to do? God, what am I supposed to do? He couldn't just come back like this. But he had. And I knew this wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to my own heartbeat. Each beat echoed in my head, a reminder of him. Of his words. Of how he had looked at me. Because I can't do this anymore without you. The clock read 4:12 a.m. when I finally couldn't take it anymore. I got up, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. But I couldn't bring myself to drink it. My hands were shaking. He knew exactly what he was doing. He always did. He always knew the right words. And I was always weak for them. No. I gritted my teeth and set the glass down. Not this time. This time, it would be different. I had survived him once. I would survive him again. Right? I had to. But if it were that simple, I wouldn't have been sitting on my kitchen floor, clutching my head. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I drifted into a restless sleep. I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating. His name lit up the screen. No. I exhaled and silenced the call, tossing the phone onto the couch. Not this time. But he didn't stop. Another call. And another. Then a message. Please. Let me talk to you. I stared at the words and felt something inside me crack. I didn't want to listen to him. I didn't want him to worm his way back into my life. But hadn't he already? I grabbed the phone, and before I could stop myself, I typed a response. Where? His reply was instant. Where it all began. I closed my eyes. Of course. Of course, he'd choose that place. The coffee shop where we first met. Where I used to laugh at his jokes and feel myself falling in love. Where I hadn't yet known he would become my greatest mistake. I clenched the phone in my hand. I shouldn't go. But I knew I would. Because part of me still wanted answers. I wanted to understand. Why had he come back? What did he want? And why, despite everything, did my heart still race when I thought of him? When I walked into the coffee shop, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Rich coffee, warm cinnamon, a hint of vanilla, it was all exactly the same as that first time. As when I still believed this story would have a happy ending. He sat at the same corner table. His posture was tense, his fingers drumming softly on his cup. Just like always. If he was nervous, he didn't show it. But I knew him. I knew him better than I wanted to. When I got closer, he looked up. His eyes roamed over me, and I saw something shift in his gaze. Something deep. Something raw. You came, he breathed. Only for 5 minutes, I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. I didn't know who I was fooling. Him? Myself? I sat across from him, crossing my arms over my chest like a barrier between us. Talk. He was silent. 2 seconds. 3. 4. Then he leaned forward, and the air between us thickened. April 2nd, 2025, 23:54. I can't do this anymore, he said softly. My heart clenched. Can't do what? His fingers tightened around his cup until his knuckles turned white. Pretend I'm not falling apart without you. His voice was quiet. But each word hit me harder than a shout. I dropped my gaze, digging my nails into my palm. This is your fault, I whispered. He closed his eyes. Briefly. Like the words hurt him, too. I know. The silence between us was sharp, like shattered glass. You broke me, I said, forcing myself to say it aloud. I know, he whispered again. He looked at me, and the pain in his eyes was undeniable. For a moment, I felt the walls I'd built around myself begin to crack. But I won't let you do it again, I added. It was meant to sound strong. But my voice shook. And he noticed. I knew he noticed. He stared at me, and I saw something change in him. He wasn't going to give up. He never had. Then prove it, he said softly. I narrowed my eyes. Prove what? Tell me you don't love me anymore. The world froze. I opened my mouth to say it. It was simple. 1 sentence. 1 strike. And he'd be gone. For good. But the words wouldn't come. My throat tightened. He saw it. And he smiled. Barely. But it was there. Triumphant. I knew it, he said. And I knew I had lost. We sat there in silence, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on us. But in that silence, I also found clarity. Loving him had hurt me. But holding on to that hurt would destroy me. I stood, breaking the moment between us. Goodbye, I whispered. This time, it wasn't just a farewell to him. It was a farewell to the part of me that couldn't let go. And as I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt something new. Freedom. Every step I took was a step toward myself. Toward a life that belonged to me. I didn't need him anymore. I never did. And for the first time, I knew I was going to be okay.